How's everybody doing? It's a great time to be here. If you didn't get the book yet, I'll be here afterwards. You can check it out if you hadn't ordered it already. I actually sent this to a couple teachers union bosses. I dedicated it to Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions actually for overplaying their hand and inadvertently doing more to advance school choice and homeschooling than anyone could have ever imagined. I sent her a copy of the book. I posted it on Twitter. Anybody on X these days? Thank goodness for Elon Musk, by the way, with community notes. She was gaslighting Congress, for a week straight, she kept switching her pinned tweet from her profile, saying that actually they were fighting to reopen the schools starting in April of 2020. No one believes that BS, and Twitter and the public went after her and slapped community notes. It's like a fact check that the public can add to tweets nowadays, and she kept changing her tweet to try to avoid the community note, and she kept getting a new one each week. But I sent her a version. I put that as one of my pinned tweets. A lot of people got a load of that. And some people made fun of me because my handwriting's not that great, so I apologize in advance. But you can't really blame me. I went to government schools. I also sent one to Stacey Davis Gates. Anybody know Stacey Davis Gates? She's the head of the Chicago Teachers Union. That was a complete dumpster fire. Look, New Mexico was horrible on reopening schools, but Chicago kept giving us example after example of that's why we need school choice. So first of all, Stacey called school choice racist last year. Guess what we found out this year? She sends her own kid to private school. Total hypocrisy. School choice for me, but not for thee. They even deleted a tweet in 2021 saying, the push to reopen schools is rooted in, you guessed it, sexism, racism, and misogyny. They threw every buzzword at the wall to see what would stick to try to prevent their members from going back to work. They were holding children's education hostage to secure multiple multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from taxpayers. But they overplayed their hand, and they've been stepping in it over and over and over again ever since. Everybody remember Zoom school? It wasn't that great. Look, we called it remote learning. We should have been real. We should have just called it remotely learning. There wasn't a lot of learning going on. But look, Voddie Baucham said it best. We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans. The good news is parents aren't surprised anymore. Because the teachers' unions fought to keep the schools closed for so long, they've opened the eyes of families all across the country. I heard we have some Monster Liberty in the room. Thank goodness for their work. The new union, the kids' union. They've basically become a new political force to be reckoned with. Parents have become a union for the kids, fighting for the right to educate their children as they see fit, a political juggernaut. I'm from Texas. Look, I know we're in a blue state, but this has solidified school choice as a GOP litmus test issue. And you need to get one party to be the first mover for the second one to come along. It's something that I talk about in chapter 4 of my new book. It's something I call bipartisanship through hyperpartisanship, which might sound counterintuitive at first. How can something being polarizing in the short run lead to both parties coming on board in the long run? It's because politicians care more about power and politics than logic or morality. And so they're only going to start listening to parental rights if they have to, if you hit them where it hurts at the ballot box. Anybody remember the Virginia election with that one guy, what's his name, in 2021? Terry, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. McAuliffe, he stepped in it. And guess what? He lost in a state that apparently went 10 points to Biden the year before. He lost to a Republican on the issue of education. And that was the number 2 issue in the election. He said he didn't care about parents right before the election. He even had Randy Weingarten stumping for him the night before the election. He had the school closer as his campaign closer. How about that? Bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it works out for him. It didn't work out for him. In fact, the next day on CNN, a Virginia mom went to camera and said that was the nail in the coffin moment for her. Having the school closer, and Virginia closed their schools for a long time too, as the campaign closer. I'm from Texas. We should have had school choice a long time ago. Our Senate has always been on board. We passed our bill, universal school choice for everybody, 18 to 13 last year through the Senate. It moved over to the House, where 21 so-called Republicans voted with all the Democrats against their own party platform issue of school choice and killed it in the House, even though Abbott was fighting for it, a huge fighter for education freedom. Well, guess what? Out of those 21 guys, 14 of them are gone. 14 are gone. That basically never happens. Incumbents, if you don't know, most of you do know, there's a lot of people running for office in the room. Incumbents usually win 95% of the time. It's a political earthquake that just rocked Texas, and I think other states are seeing what happened and saying, maybe we should pay attention. Think about the midterms. Look, there was a lot of talk about, what did you hear about in the midterms? What were they saying on the news over and over again? They were predicting a red wave. Did that really happen? Not really. There wasn't a blue wave either, really, but there was a school choice wave. 76% of the candidates supported by my organization, the American Federation for Children, won their races in 2022. Didn't even get to the good part yet. We didn't even play in the easy races. We targeted 69 incumbents in state legislatures and took out 40 of them. That's in Tennessee, that same year. 10 of the Republicans who were running for the House in Tennessee, they were either endorsed or funded by the teachers union. 9 of them lost. 9 of those guys lost. So the reason I bring that up is that the school choice and parental rights has become a GOP litmus test issue, and the teachers union endorsement has basically become a political kiss of death in Republican primaries. And why am I saying that in a blue state? Well, if you saw what happened in Virginia, anybody from Pennsylvania in here? You have family in Pennsylvania? A couple of people. Anybody know that guy, Josh Shapiro? He's their governor now. He kind of sucks in a lot of ways, right? But he was the attorney general in 2022 when he was first running for office. And guess what he did? Right before the election, his opponent, Doug Mastriano, the Trump-backed candidate, started calling him a hypocrite. He said, look, Josh, you went to private school. You sent your kids to private school. I support school choice. You're a hypocrite on the issue. By the way, Joe Biden's a hypocrite on this issue, too. He went to private school, sent his kids to private school. Then he pulls the ladder up from behind himself and tries to fight against educational opportunity for others. But right after Doug Mastriano started calling Josh Shapiro a hypocrite, guess what happened? Josh Shapiro quietly changed his education platform to include private school choice right before the election. I wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal. Conservatives weren't really happy with me. First of all, I'm going to bear hug anybody that supports my issue of school choice, whether you're Republican or Democrat, even if I don't believe you, because I'm going to put you into a corner, put a spotlight on it to make it as hard as possible for you to try to backpedal away from your position. He kind of has done that. He ultimately caved to the teachers unions who gave him over $700,000 in that year in 2022. But the reason that I pointed that out was something it reminded me that Milton Friedman once famously said. Milton Friedman had a lot of good quotes. One of his best quotes is he said something along the lines of, the way that you change things is not by getting the right people into office. Obviously, that helps if the people in this room were to win their elections. That would help by advancing freedom policies. But the way Milton Friedman said long ago, the way that you truly change things is by creating a climate of opinion where it becomes politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing. Now, it might be that Josh Shapiro didn't believe what he actually said. They're pressuring him still to this day. The editorial board at the Wall Street Journal is still pushing him on this issue and saying, look, you vetoed your own campaign promise. Again, another bold strategy. Let's see if it works out for him. But it's making it really hard for him to back out of his school choice stance. There's continued pressure ramping up. Even Jay-Z's out there in Philadelphia right now promoting Lifeline scholarships. And so the pressure is mounting up. And that's the only way Democrats are going to come along. This isn't because Democrat voters don't support school choice. It's bipartisan. It's nonpartisan. You look at the latest polling on the issue, you have supermajority support among Republicans, Democrats, and independents for the concept of school choice nationwide. The problem is the Democrat Party in too many places is a wholly owned subsidiary of the teachers' unions. Think about Randy Weingarten's union, the American Federation of Teachers. Guess how much of their funding went to Democrats in 2022? About 90%, maybe 99%, 99.9% of their campaign contributions went to Democrats. It's a money laundering scheme. It ought to be illegal, but that goes to show you why it's really hard for Democrats to support parental rights in education. That's why Terry McAuliffe, instead of backpedaling after his final debate gaffe, he was up in the polls by a lot. He had to continue quadrupling down on his stance because he didn't know where else to go. He should have just listened to parents. They have more power in numbers, and they care about their kids more than anybody else. Look at what happened in Illinois, an even deeper blue state. J.B. Pritzker, ever heard of that guy? He sucks on a lot of issues. But right before the election in 2022, he was the incumbent, up by freaking 20 points. Super safe seat. He had no chance of losing, basically. They were calling it as a safe seat. He answered a candidate survey 3 weeks before Election Day saying that he would support the same scholarship program that he vowed to eliminate back when he first ran for office in 2017. Now, again, he never saved the program. It actually went away this past year. It sunsetted. But he did go back to the Chicago Tribune this year saying that if a bill got to his desk, he would sign it to save the program. Look, he probably knew the bill was never going to make it to his desk, so it was safe for him to say that. But that is much better than Democrats just continuing to repeat the same teachers union talking points that this is going to hurt the public schools, which is not true. They've always gotten better. There's 29 studies on this topic, 26 of them positive. School choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats. Better outcomes in the public schools. Parents get more options. It's a win-win solution. Think about Florida. Paul was citing the U.S. News and World Report, the Nation's Report Card. In Florida, they were at the bottom of the pack in the Nation's Report Card a couple decades ago before they had school choice. Since they've expanded it, now they have universal school choice, everybody having the option. They've gone to the top of the pack on the Nation's Report Card. And guess what? They spend far less than the national average. It's not a money issue, it's an incentive issue. And think about it. In the U.S., since 2000, we have data on the amount of trends over time. Since 2000, the number of students in the system increased by about 7%, not that much. The number of administrators in the system increased by about 90%. 90% increase in the number of administrators. It's become more of a jobs program for adults than an education initiative for kids. And that's the sad state of affairs in this country. But the good news is we've had 12 states pass universal school choice in the past 3 years alone. Guess how many states had universal school choice in 2020? 0. Not a single state had Milton Friedman's vision of everybody. No more picking winners and losers. What I mean by universal is that, one, if you like your public school, you can keep your public school. For real this time, unlike with your doctor. You can actually choose the public school. And the public schools do actually get better. You don't lose that option. The option is actually strengthened, unlike with your doctor. But in Arizona, for example, they were one of the first states to do this. You can take that money to the public school if you want. That option's still on the table. But if not, the money goes into something called an education savings account directed by the parent. And it's typically half of what they spend in the government schools. In Arizona, it's about $14,000 a kid. $7,000 follows the student to the savings account. You can use that for private school tuition and fees if you want. You can also use just like a voucher or scholarship, but you can also use it for homeschool curriculum, micro schools. Anybody heard of the pandemic pods that were going around? When the government schools were closed, families were setting up these pandemic pods with 5 to 10 children together in a household. And you're basically economizing. It's like the one-room schoolhouse idea. You're economizing on the process of homeschooling. Anybody read the Washington Post? Horrible newspaper. No one raised their hands for anybody watching on the live stream. Nobody raised their hands. But they did a broken clock, right? They get it right twice a day. maybe one time, who knows. But with the Washington Post, they wrote an article about a New Jersey public school teacher during the COVID era. And look, you got to give them credit where credit is due. They talked about how the New Jersey public school teacher was in the system for decades, left, started a micro school or pandemic pod, had a fraction of the class size. Instead of 40, it was about 10 students, making the same amount of money because the money more directly goes from the parent to the teacher. And they had a lot more autonomy. They didn't have to deal with all the discipline policies in the public schools. They didn't have to deal with all the bureaucratic red tape and regulation. They didn't take the next logical leap and say, this is why school choice is good for teachers too, but they got halfway there. I mean, it reminds me of the New York Times when they were complaining about the school closures. They weren't really highlighting the school closures. They were saying, look, these micro schools are causing segregation because it's the advantaged families doing the micro schools. Well, if the money followed the students, you'd have more families doing this. School choice is an equalizer. They couldn't bring themselves to make that next leap either. But the micro schools have been such a threat to the status quo. Guess what happened? Well, there was a little birdie told me that the Wall Street Journal was leaked some information from the union. They sent it to the wrong person. Someone got it to the Wall Street Journal. And they were doing opposition research. The largest teachers union in the country was doing political opposition research on the founder of a micro school sector called Prenda Micro Schools. His name's Kelly Smith. And they were doing background research on him and everything. And the headline in the Wall Street Journal the next day was the teachers union's tiny little enemy. They had a picture at the front of a big elephant afraid of a little ant. But it just goes to show you how the status quo is terrified. In Arizona, for example, so many people wanted school choice when they first passed the program. Guess what happened? Their government website shut down. Yeah, it could be because it was a government website, but we didn't know at the time, so that was one of the theories. It actually came out to be the case that they now have 80,000 families signed up for education savings accounts in Arizona. It's pretty good. So not a lot of people know this. Maybe we'll cut this from the podcast later because it's a little secret of mine. Actually, a lot of people do know it. But I was actually born in Sacramento. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved to San Antonio by the time I was 4 years old. So I've lived there most of my life. And in Sacramento County, there was a lot of dumb, health orders during COVID, right? Everybody remember all the stuff that just didn't make any sense. Like when you went into the restaurant, COVID couldn't get you if you were down here, but if you were up here, like COVID was flying around up here. If you were walking to your seat, you had to wear the mask. But once you sat down, COVID was like, go ahead and eat. And when you're on the plane, it was a courteous virus. It knew when you were doing snack time, it was going to deactivate. It's like, okay, but hey, if you're not eating something, I'm going to get you and turn on. But in Sacramento County, one of the dumbest health orders, which had nothing to do with health, arbitrarily closed schools, but not the daycares. Because COVID was smart too. It knew if you were learning something in the same building, it was going to activate and get you. But if you're sitting there in the same place, I think New Mexico had some stuff like this too, where they were closing the schools for learning, opening up for daycares, and then charging families hundreds of dollars a week. I know there was also a closure order, and I still don't know why this happened. Maybe someone can fill me in on this later. But there was a closure order to all the schools in New Mexico. They were closed more than just about any other state. And the private schools had to be at 25% capacity, but the public schools could be at 50% capacity. It seemed like the government's way to put their thumb on the scale to limit any form of competition whatsoever. But in Sacramento County, there was a private Christian school that actually rebranded itself as a daycare. It retrained all of his employees and said, I know the schools are dangerous places, but we're a daycare. We're doing some learning on the side. And the health official was not happy about this. But it just goes to show you, when the private schools were forced to close by the authoritarian governments, they sued to reopen, or they tried to do things like this to try to serve and meet the needs of their customers. The union celebrated every step of the way. I was living in D.C. at the time during COVID. I do not recommend it. They had vaccine passports and everything. They were one of the worst. But they had fake body bags that the teachers' unions put outside the public school offices. Yeah, they did that. And in places like Chicago, they were vacationing in Puerto Rico, thousands of miles away, while saying that they couldn't go back to work in person. There was so much lunacy going on at the time. Sometimes I didn't know, like, if I was in reality or if I was in a nightmare. And a couple of years ago, I woke up to what I thought was a headline of a Babylon Bee article. Anybody know Babylon Bee? Oh, yeah. So, like, it's a satire website, right? And they even, because you don't know these days whether it's real life or satire, they actually have an account on Twitter called Not the Babylon Bee. I think they have their own website, too, because it's things that are so ridiculous. It's like, no, this is actually real life. This is not parody. We got to tell you this because you don't know these days. So I woke up to what I thought was a headline from the Babylon Bee. I thought it was a nightmare. It was neither one of those things, unfortunately. Guess what it was? It was a tweet by Randi Weingarten herself. And guess what she said? She was in Ukraine at the front lines to assess the situation. The heck was the teachers union boss from America doing in Ukraine right after the nation's report card scores had just came out showing decades of learning loss? What was she going to do? Make the war go remote like she did with our schools? That might actually, haven't the Ukrainian kids already suffered enough? You already ruined our schools. But because they've been so drunk on power for so long, they don't know how to backtrack. They will not reverse course. But that has led to an all-time high in support for school choice, and Gallup has just showed the all-time low in confidence in the public school system overall. And it's been more so among Republicans. I think it was like a 5% said that they were confident in the public school system overall. Democrats, it wasn't a majority support, but it was much different by Republicans. Now, why might that be? Why are Republicans less likely to support the public school system overall than the Democrats? Well, the radical left has figured out that they don't even have to have their own kids anymore. They can infiltrate the government-run school system, churn out Democrat voters by controlling the minds of other people's children for 13 years of their lives, for 7 hours a day. You think Hollywood has an outsized influence on the rest of society? This is even more important. This is where you strike at the root because we're dealing with young, impressionable minds. And you're not going to win this war just by outpopulating the other side. You can't just have more kids because they're using the school system to promote their radical left agenda. And you might say, it's not my school. Well, guess what? We've had videos by Accuracy in Media. It's an undercover journalism group in red states of all places. In my home state of Texas, Utah, Idaho, Iowa, you name it. They're public school administrators on video admitting, even in states where they ban critical race theory, for example, Marxist ideology that divides children based on immutable characteristics, they're going to teach it anyway. It's a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. They just change the goalpost every step of the way, and you're never going to get out of that mess through freedom as opposed to force unless you have school choice, bottom-up accountability. Then we can all respect what each other wants for their own children, and you won't have a special interest controlling the minds of other people's children. We like to talk about how the union has a monopoly on funding, but they also have a monopoly on the minds of raising other people's kids, a near monopoly, and that's an even bigger problem. And so that's why school choice from the bottom up is a better solution, and it will provide accountability for the public schools to do a better job. Look, we've heard for a long time, what was the argument from the teachers union if you didn't like your public school, if you didn't like what was happening in your classroom? They said, we're accountable. We have democratic accountability. You can show up at the school board meetings. We saw how that worked out, didn't we? They cut off our mics. They're still doing that. What else did they do to parents? They labeled them as domestic terrorists. The National School Boards Association, yes, they did this, sent a letter to Biden implying that parents, under the Patriot Act of all things, should be investigated for domestic terrorism. It was an attempt to bully and silence parents into submission. Thankfully, their plan only backfired. It emboldened parents. They told families to just sit down and shut up. If you don't agree with us, we don't want to hear from you. Only show up and voice your opinion if you agree with us. And earlier drafts of that letter, a lot of people remember the letter, but they don't remember this part. Earlier drafts of that letter called for the military to be deployed to school board meetings. It called for the National Guard to be deployed to school board meetings to tell parents to sit down and shut up. And they even had the FBI created a threat tag specifically for parents showing up at school board meetings. Oh, the audacity of parents showing up and wanting to have a say in their own kids' education. Well, guess what happened to them? 26 states have left the National School Boards Association since that letter. It's pretty good. It should be 50 states. I don't know where the rest of them, but look, we should rename them. There's the Regional School Boards Association at this point, the RSBA instead of the NSBA. But it just goes to show you, although there was a lot of dark times during COVID, there's a silver lining and families have woken up. And if parents do band together, they can become a political force to be reckoned with. We saw with the National School Boards Association. We saw this in the midterms. We saw this in Texas, in my home state recently. We saw this with Terry. I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach McAuliffe. And this is a trend I think will continue. And some Democrats will have to be forced to come along, but it requires the Republicans to become the parents' party. You have to have one party be the first mover, win some votes on the issue, then the other party will have an incentive to come along. I don't think it should be a partisan issue. In fact, I was testifying before Congress a couple months ago. My months are all blended together. By the way, the book became a national bestseller recently. The left didn't like that either. A school choice book, of all things, makes the national bestseller list. There was a group called Moms Against Greg Abbott. It's a lefty group out in Texas. And they wanted to spin the story and however they could. They're like, oh, what do you think of when you think bestseller? Do you think New York Times? Or do you think USA Today? Because mine was a USA Today bestseller, not a New York Times bestseller. New York Times editorialized. They get to pick. It's not solely based on sales, where the USA Today one is. They put a poll on Twitter saying, which one do you think of is the better one? The response backfired, and somehow USA Today was the number one response. But we have had some Democrats defect on the issue. I talked about Josh Shapiro, J.B. Pritzker. Think about anybody from North Carolina or Georgia or have relatives in those states? Well, North Carolina, this was the first state where you had a sitting legislator on the Democrat side, Tricia Cotham. She switched to the Republican Party as a sitting legislator. So they're not just losing votes on the issue, they're losing actual sitting legislators on the issue in North Carolina and in Georgia. Guess what happened in North Carolina? They are one of the most recent states to go all in on school choice. They passed universal school choice even before South Carolina did so. Imagine how that works. But in North Carolina, when Tricia Cotham switched, she gave the GOP a 60% majority in their House. That was just enough votes to override a veto by their hypocrite governor, Roy Cooper. He's such a hypocrite. You go onto his North Carolina governor website right now, and all red at the top, there's a declaration of emergency. Is it a declaration about a hurricane or something like that? Or a natural disaster? No, he declared a state of emergency over school choice. Talk about an abuse of emergency powers. More so, it's like him stomping his feet and throwing a temper tantrum because he knew that he did not have the power to keep a veto from getting overridden in North Carolina. Now, despite the best wishes of their hypocrite who sent his own daughter to private school, and again, I don't blame him for that. Everybody should seek out the best educational opportunities for their kids. That's not the point. The point is, you shouldn't say you're for low-income families getting an opportunity and saying that public schools are the best option for everyone, and then not sending your kid to the public school, and then not allowing other families to have the options. I mean, when you think about it, Democrats support school choice in theory when it comes to higher education. Anybody heard of the Pell Grant? Pell Grant's a scholarship. It's taxpayer funding. You can use it at the community college if you want, but you don't have to take it to an assigned government-run university. You can take it to a private university, even a religious university. The horror. No one says anything about that. Democrats support or Republicans support. Think about pre-K before you get to kindergarten. The Head Start program, other pre-K programs, the money follows the child. You can take the money. It doesn't have to go to an assigned pre-K provider. So why is it any different when you get to those in-between years of K-12 education? If you're trying to think about it logically, it makes zero sense. When you think about it in terms of power dynamics, it makes all the sense in the world. Choice is the norm for higher education and pre-K, but choice threatens an entrenched special interest only when it comes to the in-between years of K-12 education. So of course, they fight against any change to the status quo. You can keep the analogy going. We do this with hospitals. Think about Medicare. You can take a Medicare voucher to a government-run hospital if you want, but you could even take it to a Catholic religiously affiliated hospital if you want to do that too. It follows the decision of the family. Same thing with Section 8 housing vouchers. Vouchers are good and they're fine and dandy for everything else, but not K through 12 education. Ooh, vouchers. They've even tried to, they know it polls less well than scholarships, so the teachers' unions tried to call everything a voucher, even if by definition it's an education savings account, which is different from a voucher. But all that aside, they support vouchers for literally everything else. And so when they try to say public money for public schools, call them out on this. What about higher education? You support that. What about pre-K? What about grocery stores? We have food stamp vouchers. Does that have to go to a government-assigned grocery store? No. Not yet. Yeah, don't give them any ideas, right? Don't give the socialists any ideas. But for the most part, the vast majority of society can all agree that if we're going to spend the money, I'm not making an argument whether we should have more or less food stamps or Medicaid. All I'm saying is if we're going to spend the money, it should go to people, not buildings. We should fund students, not systems. It should go to parents, not bureaucrats. You probably couldn't read the inside of the cover earlier, but that's what my signature will say. Good thing my byline is very short. Just fund students, not systems. 4 words, so the signing won't take very long after this. But I can't say it's bad handwriting because I'm a doctor. I'm technically a doctor, but the thing is, I'm not a real doctor. I'm more like a Jill Biden doctor. I got a PhD in education policy. I can help you with math, but not the important stuff. Maybe I can help you with math. But look, we've made such advancements that you've had sitting legislators flip on the issue. It was Misha Maynor, a Democrat in Georgia. Louisiana was the 12th state. They just passed universal school choice. Now we have a dozen states with universal school choice. The governor's about to sign it. It's his bill. He hasn't signed it yet, but Jeff Landry's a big supporter of school choice. They didn't need a single Democrat vote in their House, but guess what? 20% of their House Democrats voted for it. It's pretty good. Look, you might say, that's only 6 Democrats in Louisiana. I know, but that's still better than 0%, what we've gotten before. I'll take any bipartisan support that we can get. And counterintuitively, if the Democrats would lock arms like the parents are already doing, the teachers' unions wouldn't have control over them anymore. Because they can primary 1 or 2 defectors. They can say, oh, you're voting for school choice, we're going to come get you. But if all the Democrats banded together and did the right thing in the legislature, the unions would have nowhere else to go. Who else? They're not going to go towards the... I mean, sometimes there's a rhino in your lurch. You better not have that in a blue state. All the Republicans you could get, they better support school choice. I mean, this is a Republican Party platform issue, and it's just the right thing to do. You think about other states. I have to get back to... Sometimes I'll go off on like 10 tangents, then I'll come back. I told you I testified before Congress. I wasn't bringing that up just to say, oh, I testified before Congress. I brought it up because there's a bill right now in Congress called the Educational Choice for Children Act. This is one way to bring school choice to blue states too, because it's a federal tax credit. It's private money. You get your own tax dollars back in the form of a tax credit for K-12 education expenses in the private sector. It has 140 co-sponsors in Congress right now. It's all Republicans. President Trump supports it. And in the Senate, there's like 30 to 40 co-sponsors as well. Again, all Republicans. I testified before the House Ways and Means Committee. And the minority leader, he was from Connecticut. It was a congressman from Connecticut, a Democrat, if you couldn't guess that already, in Connecticut. But I looked them all up before. He went to private school himself. I didn't call him on this during the testimony. I probably should have. But his main line of questioning was, Corey, you're acting like this is such a partisan issue. Democrats support school choice too. And I responded to him and said, respectfully, they're all Republicans signed on. Do you want to sign on to the bill too? Anybody want to bet whether he took me up on my offer? Or not? It's like he walked right into that one, right? It's like, it's not a partisan issue. Well, then sign on to it. Well, he didn't sign on to it. It's still all Republicans sign it. But I would welcome him. I really would have welcomed him to sign on to the bill. So, in Congress, that's one way to move the ball forward and to get more families education choice, not just in red states, but in blue states as well. We had Georgia, North Carolina. I wish we had more examples of Democrats coming along, but it's a lot more than in years past. And it's not going to be because you just pretend things are bipartisan and that it's not just going to appear out of nowhere. It's going to be because politicians are responding to the political power dynamics in front of them.